The sky was painted with streaks of gold that morning, the kind of sunrise that made people believe in good days ahead. But inside the Montclair mansion, the beauty of the outside world felt like it belonged to someone else. Behind the tall iron gates, past the fountains and gardens trimmed to perfection, life wasn't as flawless as the pictures in magazines. In one wing of the house, a boy named Daniel Montclair sat in his wheelchair, staring out at a garden he had never touched with his own feet. Daniel was 13, with a quiet face that seemed older than his years. He had never walked a single step, born with a rare neuromuscular condition. His legs were weak, unresponsive. The best doctors money could buy had tried every treatment such as physical therapy, experimental programs overseas, but the results were always the same. No progress. Over time, Daniel stopped asking about walking. He stopped trying to. His world became his bedroom, his video games, and the big window that looked out over the roses and the fountain. His father, Richard Montclair, was a man who made his fortune in real estate. He was known for his drive, his ability to close impossible deals, his unshakable confidence. But when it came to his son's condition, Richard felt powerless. His wife Catherine had poured her heart into caring for Daniel, but the constant cycle of hope and disappointment had left her tired, too. She still smiled, but the smile was thinner than it used to be. One afternoon, after yet another therapist admitted they could go no further, Richard sat in his study with his head bowed, staring at the floor. He didn't want to admit it out loud, but he felt like they were losing their son, not physically, but piece by piece inside. They needed help, not another medical expert, but someone who could take the weight of the daily routine so Catherine could rest. Someone who could keep the house running and maybe, just maybe, bring some life back into it. That's when the agency sent Grace Holloway. She arrived on a Thursday morning carrying nothing more than a small suitcase and a presence that somehow filled the entire foyer. She was tall, strong-shouldered in her late 50s, with hair the color of midnight streaked with silver. Her eyes were warm but sharp, like she could see right through any excuse. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had lived enough life to know what mattered. Raised in the rural South, mother to 5 grown children, grandmother to more than she could count, Grace had spent her life caring for others, not because it was a job, but because it was who she was. She didn't just work for a living, she carried people through their hardest days. Her first task was to deliver breakfast to Daniel's room. She knocked gently before walking in. "Morning, Mr. Daniel," she said in a voice that seemed to carry sunshine into the room. "You can just leave it on the desk," he murmured without looking up from his game controller. Grace didn't move, and missed the chance to see who I'm cooking for. "No, sir, that's not how I do things." She set the tray on his lap and studied him for a moment. "You eaten enough?" Daniel shrugged, his eyes flicking back to the screen. Grace didn't push, but the next morning, she brought pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. When he raised an eyebrow, she said, "Every explorer needs fuel." The day after that, she told him a funny story about her grandson who once tried to teach their cat to pray before dinner. Slowly, Daniel began to talk, but cat first, just a few words, then whole sentences. One afternoon, as rain tapped against the windows, Grace sat beside him and asked about his legs. "They don't work," Daniel said bluntly. "Doctors say they never will." Grace didn't flinch. "Well, doctors know a lot, but they don't know everything." Daniel looked at her, puzzled. Nobody had ever questioned the doctors before. The next week, Grace brought an old wooden cane and leaned it against the wall. "My late husband used this when he busted his leg falling off a ladder," she explained. "Doesn't mean you gotta use it. It just means it's here if you ever feel like it." Daniel glanced at it like it was an artifact from another world. "I can't walk, remember?" Grace smiled. "And I can't swim across the ocean. But that doesn't mean I don't dream about it sometimes." That night, while reaching for a book, Daniel's eyes kept drifting to the cane. Something about it stirred a small, quiet curiosity he thought he'd buried years ago. Over the following days, Grace began weaving small exercises into their routines. She'd hum an old gospel tune and ask him to tap his toes to the beat. She'd challenge him to see how far he could lift his legs before they tired. She didn't make it feel like therapy, it was a game. Daniel noticed something unusual about Grace. She never looked at him with pity. She spoke to him like he was capable of more than he realized. One rainy afternoon, his hand brushed the cane. Without thinking, he gripped it and tried to stand. His legs trembled, his arms strained, but for the first time in his life, they held him 3 whole seconds before he fell back into his chair. Grace, folding laundry nearby, saw it. She didn't rush over. She simply said, 3 seconds today, maybe 4 tomorrow. When Catherine heard about it, she began watching their sessions from the doorway. Then Richard started coming home earlier to see for himself. It wasn't dramatic, but it was something. A spark. The sessions grew. 1 step, then rest. 2 steps, then rest. Grace told him stories about people she knew who had overcome things everyone said were impossible. The world's full of folks who were told you can't until they did. She'd say, Daniel began to look forward to their walks, even if they were just across his bedroom. The walls no longer felt like the limits of his life, they were just the beginning. One bright morning, Grace told him they were going outside. I can't walk that far, Daniel protested. You don't have to, she said. We'll take it slow, and if you can't, I'll push your chair. But you're gonna feel the sun on your face. Step by step, leaning on the cane and Grace's steady arm, they moved down the hallway. Sweat beaded on Daniel's forehead, but when they reached the front door, his chest swelled with something he couldn't name. The garden was even more beautiful up close. He could smell the roses, hear the fountain's gentle splash, feel the breeze. It wasn't through a pane of glass, it was his world now, even if it was only for a few steps. From that day, the hallway wasn't enough. They practiced in the driveway, then down the garden path. Sometimes he fell, sometimes he cursed under his breath, but Grace never let him give up. One evening, after a bad fall, Daniel sat on the floor, angry and shaking. Maybe the doctors were right, he said. Grace knelt down beside him. Baby, I've seen too many people give up 1 step before the miracle. I'm not gonna let you be one of them. Autumn came, crisp and bright. The Montclairs hosted a charity event on their lawn, full of business associates and friends. Grace whispered to Daniel that morning, today's the day you show them. His stomach twisted. I can't do it in front of everyone. Yes, you can, she said softly. Not for them, for you. When the time came, Grace wheeled him to the center of the lawn. The guests turned to watch. Grace handed him the cane. Slowly, painfully, Daniel rose. 1 step, 2, 3. The crowd gasped. Catherine covered her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. Richard's eyes shone with something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Daniel stopped in front of Grace, his chest heaving, a smile breaking across his face. The crowd erupted in applause. For him, the cheers weren't the victory was the feeling in his heart that he'd done what he once believed was impossible. After that day, Daniel walked a little more each week. The cane became less a crutch and more a companion. By spring, he could walk the full garden path without it. When Grace's contract ended months later, the Montclairs begged her to stay. She shook her head. My work here's done. There's another family that needs me now. On her last morning, she hugged Daniel tightly. Remember this, your legs didn't get you walking, your heart did. Never forget that. Years later, Daniel would stand on a stage as a young man telling his story to a crowd. He'd speak of his parents, the doctors, and then he'd tell them about Grace Holloway, the woman who gave him more than strength in his legs. She gave him belief. And belief, he'd say, is the first step toward every miracle. This is how a boy who had never taken a step walked into the rest of his life, because someone fixed him, but because someone believed he wasn't broken in the first place.